we've got going on here in Hayward. If you happen to miss our program last time, it was recorded and is on our website. And what we talked about there is some of the basics of defensive space for your home. And tonight we're doing something a little different than we've done ever before with this project. And we're going to start talking a little bit tonight about protecting wildlife or considering wildlife as we're doing the defensible space around our homes. I know that's a big reason why a lot of us choose to live in the wildland urban interface is the beauty of the trees and the wildlife that surrounds us. And just because we're asking you to be fire safe doesn't mean that we don't want you to take into consideration the wildlife that is around you. So since we're all in pandemic mode and doing the Zoom meetings for this rather than going out to multiple sites where we would do the same presentation, we thought we would bring multiple kind of themes to these and expand the topic just a little bit this time around. So today we're talking about the Defensible Space Demonstration Project that we got the FEMA grant money for. And part of that requirement for the FEMA grant is to make sure that we have environmental considerations that we take into account. So what we're going to talk about is some of the FEMA requirements for us to do in our defensible space project site. And again, this is the site that we're talking about out at the end of Marie Drive and Leona Drive, and that backs up to the Ward Creek Canyon there. So in order to do that, we want to make sure that we're protecting protected species and habitat and any protected plants that are there. What we did was we've already had somebody go out and do a biological survey of the site. And as we're doing the work, we're going to be at certain times having a biologist out monitoring while the contractor is out doing the work to make sure that we don't do things like disturb nesting birds. So why did this topic come up? I thought it was a good topic for a number of reasons. One, I'm personally a fan of it. And two, last year when we were getting ready to do some of the work on some of our city-owned properties, there were some concerns from people in the community who wanted to make sure that we were being protective of the riparian environment that we were going to be doing the work in. And it just showed to me how there is a desire for this type of work and potentially education in the community as we move forward with our defensible space project, and thought we would take this opportunity to share some of that with you. You do not have to get a biologist to come in and look at and survey your work before you do this. Take this information that we're doing to kind of look at it and think before you start doing some work, what can you do, and just kind of look for some of the little telltale signs that we're talking about here today, and just kind of think about the environment and the animals that we are sharing our city of Hayward and Fairview Fire Protection with. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about wildlife protection on the Home and Defensible Space Project. And I would like to introduce Mr. Doug Gainey, who's going to be doing the bulk of the presentation tonight.
Okay, thank you, Chief Vollmer. Appreciate, thanks to you and to the city for inviting me here. Again, my name is Doug Gainey. I have a small business. I'm over in San Francisco, and we do environmental planning and field science studies. So biology surveys, geology, water quality, archaeology, that sort of thing. For the last couple of years, I have been working across the state on disaster recovery. Unfortunately, that's a large area to work in these days, but doing environmental review disaster recovery projects and natural hazard mitigation projects, which is what this project is, Hayward's defensible space demonstration project. As Chief said, they received a grant from FEMA to do that project in Ward Canyon. And FEMA, because it's a federal agency, has requirements under the National Environmental Policy Act to do environmental review of projects that it funds. So it's decided to give the grant to the city. What they funded so far is phase one, and phase one is the planning portion of the project. So that includes things like public notice and this presentation. And it also includes the biological survey that we did to get ready to do the actual vegetation management work in Ward Canyon. So once we've completed our biology report, that will get submitted to FEMA, and they'll do their review and then approve phase two, which is the actual vegetation project. As Chief said, we're going to be talking about protecting wildlife, and that's, two parts. One is in the Ward Canyon demonstration project, and the other part is how to protect wildlife at your home if you're doing a defensible space project. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give a good list of references from experts like at Cal Fire and University of Oregon, several places where there's a whole lot of other good information if you want to do a project at your home. We're just going to touch on the basics tonight, but there's a lot of resources out there. So Norma, next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so what we did for the city is what's known as a biological reconnaissance survey. It's basically a day survey where you go out to a site where you're going to be doing some work, and you document all the plants and animals that you see. And you look specifically for potential sensitive species, that's endangered species, threatened species, because we want to be aware of their potential presence before we go in and do our project work. Before we went and did the biosurvey, we did some research of federal and state databases that show where there might be threatened and endangered species in the area. And then we take that information and we know what to look for. And then did the reconnaissance survey. We document all the plant species that we're seeing. This is a good time of year. We just did the survey a week or two ago. It's a good time of year to do a plant survey because they're all starting to bloom. So it's a lot easier to recognize the plants that are blooming. And part of the survey includes nesting birds. Nesting birds are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And since we're going to be clearing vegetation, that's where the nests are. So we want to be extra careful not to harm any nests during our work. And as Chief said, there will most likely be biological monitoring during the defensible space project. So we can be on the lookout for new nests that might have been built since our survey, and make sure we don't impact any vegetation containing the nests. A last thing we look at is something called critical habitat. Critical habitat are specific geographic areas designated for threatened and endangered species by law, and we're not allowed to impact critical habitat. And the good news is, for this project anyway, the good news is there's no critical habitat identified in the Ward Creek area. Next slide, please. And so here's a list of the federally listed threatened and endangered species that could occur in the area. And now this is a search that's done on a broad area, kind of larger than Ward Creek itself, within a mile or so. So you see some things here like the western snowy plover. That's a shorebird. It's not going to be in Ward Creek. vernal pool fairy shrimp. There's no vernal pools in the canyon. So we're not worried about that. The Delta smelt doesn't go up there. We're not worried about those. So we can rule out a few of these, but it's, this is just being conservative. Again, no critical habitat. And the only federal plant that's protected that could be in the area is the Santa Cruz tar plant. Next slide, please. And then here are the state listed sensitive species. They differ a little from the federal species, but they're protected too. There's a few bats that could be out there. There's a few insects. And in my practice runs for this presentation, I couldn't get past crotch bumblebee without people giggling. So I just want you to know that that bee is named after an entomologist named George Crotch. So it's a person's name, and it doesn't present a threat to your crotch. The foothill yellow-legged frog is a state listed species that has potential to be out there. And the tar plant is also on the state list. There's a picture here of the tar plant. It's like a little mini sunflower with leaves that exude a sticky tar-like substance. The good news, again, for this study is we did not see any evidence that the tar plant exists in the Ward Canyon area. This is a plant that can be identified before it blooms, and our botanist made sure that there were none out there. Of course, we'll be monitoring during the work, and there are actually only 15 places left in California where this plant exists. So we're not too concerned about it for the sake of our project. Next slide, please. So as Chief said, this is the study area where we're going to do the defensible space demonstration. It's about 5 acres, and it's kind of between Marie and Leona Drives, a little out to the northeast and southwest. My understanding is we've got the trail, the Hayward Plunge Trail there, that's upstream of Ward Creek. So we're not going to go beyond the trail down to the creek, and that's good news for aquatic species. We don't have to worry about what's in the creek, as long as we're not stirring up a lot of soil, which we don't intend to do. We'll stay out of the creek. Next slide, please. So here's some photos taken a couple weeks ago of existing conditions in the area. On the left, you can see a lot of sort of woody, dead biomass material quite close to a house in the area. And so that's flammable stuff, and that's the kind of material we want to get rid of. And on the right is what they call slash. It's kind of dead and cut branches that have fallen on the forest floor there, flammable as well. That's what we're looking to remove for our demonstration.
Yeah, and Doug, if I can just add in right here, just as a little throwback to last month's demonstrate or class and presentation that we did. You can see right now we've got a perfect fuel ladder going on right there. We've got high dead grass, we've got low brush, and we've got branches that are low down to the ground. And we've got any kind of way that if we had a start in the grass, it's going to make an easy run up to the crown of the trees. And we're definitely within, 10 feet of a home right there. So this right here is a perfect scenario of what we are trying to avoid. And when we get done with this site, these pictures that we're taking here, if we come back and take this same picture, we're going to have a really good, healthy picture of what good defensible space looks like, while also providing some habitat and the nature that we enjoy.
Thanks, Chief. And yeah, jump in anytime if you want to add something or if I misspeak. Next slide, please. These are also existing conditions in the study area, and this looks a little bit better here. A little more clearance in front of the houses. We'll still probably want to trim some of those hanging branches away. On the right, you got some coast live oaks there that they show kind of good spacing and good clearance of underbrush, but the point Chief just made about ladder fuels, because they're on a slope and they're sort of tipping horizontally, that will transmit fire more quickly than if they were on flat ground and straight up and down. So there may still need to be some branch removal in this area. Next slide. So there are several non-native species out in that area, and there's our three here. We've got a Peruvian pepper tree on the left, a tree of heaven in the center, and some kind of pretty Bermuda buttercup on the right. And even though it's kind of pretty, it sort of presents a problem because it grows really fast and it outcompetes the native species, and it's flammable. So focusing on the non-native species in defensible space projects is always a good idea. Invasive species get a bad rap, and there's pros and cons to them. They're obviously successful, so kudos to them for being successful, but they outcompete the natives, and the natives have built into the local ecosystem for a long time. They tend to be more drought resistant, fire resistant. They're better for the wildlife because the wildlife is used to foraging on native plants. And so that's why we'll consistently emphasize using native plants in your defensible space projects and removing the non-natives to the extent possible. Next slide. And here's an extreme case, and this is on the study site. You got an old California bay laurel tree, old growth tree. You can barely see it because it's been overtaken by invasive, non-native English ivy that's grown up it, and eventually will kill the tree because it outcompetes it for light and for water. And so if that tree dies, you've got one less large old growth tree. And having old growth trees well spaced is really preferable from a wildfire safety standpoint to having all this sprawling invasive vine-like material. So a goal again is to keep the natives, keep the large growth trees, remove the excess vegetation. Next slide, please. And so again, your target outcome will look something like this. You've got well-spaced trees that are native to the area. Next slide. Our biologist, his name is Chris. He's not on the meeting today, but he identified 3 habitats in the study area, 3 separate habitats within that 5-acre area. This is just sort of for informational purposes, but there's a coast live oak woodland is one name of a habitat. Down closer to the creek, you've got your California bay riparian woodland. And then in open areas, you've got some annual grassland. Next slide, please. So I already gave away that there's no critical habitat for threatened and endangered species in our work area. But that doesn't mean it's not decent habitat for some of these species. So here's a picture of the creek in a spot where it's kind of shallow water. It's running smoothly. We got some topographic riffles in the stream bottom. This is actually good habitat for the yellow-legged frog. They like this kind of environment. So it's definitely possible that they would exist in this area. Chris did not see them during his survey or any evidence of them, didn't hear them, but it doesn't mean they couldn't exist. Again, we're staying mostly away from the water, but it's a reason we'll probably be doing monitoring during the project just to make sure we don't find a wandering yellow-legged frog upstream. Next slide. With respect to the red-legged frog, federally protected frog, we do not think that this is good habitat for red-legged frog. There's not a lot of emergent vegetation in the water, and that's what they like to hide behind to lay their eggs and breed. So the evidence we saw is this is not a good, Ward Creek in this area is not good for red-legged frogs. So our biologist is not concerned about that. We'll share that information with FEMA and see if they come to the same conclusion. Next slide, please. So here's a list of the actual species that were observed during the one-day survey. It was on April 1st. You know, a relatively unexciting list, none of the threatened and endangered species, sign of a deer, some of your nice but more common birds, the jays, bluebirds, wild turkeys, things we're kind of used to seeing and not too concerned with from a protection standpoint. Documented 63 different plants in the area, but these did not include the endangered Santa Cruz tar plant. Next slide. So despite those findings of no threatened and endangered species, we're still proposing biological monitoring during vegetation removal, and that's for reasons we've kind of discussed already. Potential for frog presence, California yellow-legged frog. We didn't see any bats when we were out there, but we did our survey during the day, so you wouldn't expect to see any bats, and we're going to be removing vegetation where bats could possibly live, so we'll keep an eye out for those, and obviously the nesting birds. So biological monitoring will likely be required by FEMA, and I believe done by the city regardless. Next slide. So that was those are the results of the biological survey, and if you have any questions on those, you can put them in the chat and we'll get to them after. Now we're going to move on to protection of wildlife during individual home defensible space projects. So what you might be doing at your home to clear vegetation and make your house more fire safe in a way that's more protective of habitat. And so you see the goal there is find that balance between reducing the vegetation, but still keeping some areas untreated in a safe way for the wildlife that live in the area. With respect to timing, the best time of year to do these projects is the fall. You avoid the nesting season and denning season. And there's also fewer insect outbreaks to worry about that time of year. And we're going to talk about different zones with respect to your house. And the first zone, we're going to show a picture on the next slide, but this first zone, the ember resistant zone, is how I know it. Chief might have a different name for it, but it's basically the first 6 feet from your house. There should be no vegetation in that zone, and that's to keep embers from falling close to your house and igniting right in close proximity to your house. So there should be no vegetation in that area, no wood chips, no mulch in that first zone. Did I get that right, Chief? That the city requirements, 6 feet, right?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a requirement. That's your case scenario, right? So if you start there as making that an ember-free zone, put the kind of materials there that if an ember were to land on it, there is little to no chance that that ember could catch something on fire that close to your home.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, Norma, please. Okay, so this slide is a diagram that comes from CAL FIRE, and it shows zones other zones around your home. So again, 6 feet out, ideally no vegetation. And then the other zone, zone 1, is your home protection zone, and that goes out to 30 feet. And zone 2 is your reduced fuel zone, goes out to 100 feet. So these are hypotheticals based on a yard of a certain size. Oops. And they have different requirements. So ideally, if you've got, let's say you've got forest beyond 100 feet, and that would basically remain the same. We'll talk about that. I know a lot of folks don't have forests or have more than 100 feet beyond their house, but so let's talk about the first 2 zones first. So this is from 6 feet to 30 feet, your home protection zone, ways to protect wildlife while doing your defensible space. And like the guidance is to keep it lean, clean, and green. So in this zone, you can have vegetation, but you want to keep it well spaced. You want to keep it low, and you want to have native drought-resistant plants in the area. So that's your lean, clean, green. And the goal is to create and maintain a space that if one of these plants were to ignite, because no plants are completely fireproof, it's not going to transmit the fire to your home. So you'll see, I'll show some pictures at the end, but you'll see landscape with a lot of rocks and walls with plants spread out, interspersed in that landscape. Again, if you plant the native species, drought-resistant plants recommended by your nurseries, those provide excellent forage for wildlife, fruits and insects that, because they're native wildlife, they like to eat those native plants. If you put clumps of shrubs together, small clumps of shrubs, that provides good nesting and hiding shelter for small mammals and birds. Another thing you might consider is putting in a bird bath or some other source of water for wildlife. So again, having, and I like to emphasize diversity in, the more different kinds of plants with sort of different heights and different spacing creates a diverse garden that's a good benefit to the wildlife in the area. Next slide, please. This slide you might have seen in the first presentation that the city did in this series. It also comes from CAL FIRE, and it shows spacing guides. If you're on a typical flat slope, if you've got shrubs, you want to space them about 2 times their height from each other. So they're well removed from each other. The trees, you want to keep them, the outermost part of the trees, you want to keep 10 feet from each other. And the same CAL FIRE website that I reference at the back of this presentation has also other slides that show if your property is on a slope, what the proper spacing is there. So that's a good resource for you. Next slide, please. So zone 2, the reduced fuel zone. So think about the first zone we just talked about, where you've got your rock gardens with interspersed native sort of succulent plants. And then beyond 100 feet, you've got, we'll say you've got actual forest there. You're in the WUI, wildland urban interface. This is the zone between those two. So it's the reduced fuel zone where you're going from forest into that home protection zone. So here, we still want to use primarily native species, but in this zone, you can put in some shrubs and trees with that same well-spaced design. But instead of just very low plants, you can put in some taller trees here. Again, you want to try and remove invasive species that compete with the natives, grow too fast, and can be fuel for fire. Climate appropriate here means basically drought resistant plants are what you want to get. So if you go to your nursery and no one's helping you and you're confused about what sort of plants are better for drought resistance, fire resistance, the leaf type will tell you what you need to know. The stiff leathery leaves that you see in a lot of succulent plants or cactus, those are more drought resistant. If the leaves are light colored, silver, those will reflect light and keep the area cooler. Leaves with a hairy underside hold moisture and keep the area cooler. Plants with a lot of small leaves tend to be better for cooling. They act as little solar panels. They're better than one large leaf. And then there's actually some plants that track the sun through the day. They kind of turn to face the direction of the sun. Those are good plants to use in this zone for shrubs. Next slide, please. And so if you happen to have a large lot where you're going beyond 100 feet, there are more things you can do to protect wildlife, but still do defensible space work. And so there's some features that are good for wildlife. The first one is this photo. This is one I took from Lake County recently, and it's what we call a snag. I have a typo in here where it says standing burned tree because I deal with a lot of those. What it should say is standing dead tree. Didn't necessarily burn, it just died. And they call that a snag. If you can look closely at this photo, there are holes all through this dead tree that a woodpecker drilled. These snags provide great food and shelter for wildlife. The woodpeckers actually push some acorns into these holes they drill, and the acorns are not for them to eat later. They're a trap. Insects come and eat them, and then the woodpeckers swoop down and get the insects. So they're pretty clever. But leaving a few snags out beyond 100 feet is good if you're looking to improve wildlife ecosystem. Same with logs. If you leave a few fallen logs in this area on the ground, those are great habitat. They also prevent soil erosion. They also contribute nutrients to the soil. So a log here and there out beyond 100 feet is not a bad idea. Again, the large legacy trees, the old hardwood trees, oaks and cherries, if you have them, are kind of the backbone of the wildlife habitat, and good to have those interspersed with clearing between them. Next slide, please.
Real quick on that, Doug, I just wanted to talk a little bit, and you don't have to move the slide because this talks about it too. If you do have a tree with, one of the key factors Doug is talking about there is if you're over 100 feet away from your home. And then the other factor to think of too is it 100 feet away from your neighbor's home? So think about it in that reverse direction also. And if there are questions that you have about it, we can send somebody out to talk about it and evaluate for the fire safety versus the habitat they would provide. Like a large log on the ground is not going to catch fire and ignite very easily. And so that's more like what we were talking about last time, like a 100-hour, 1,000-hour fuel. So it's going to take a lot to get that thing going, and it's not really going to add much to the fuel load versus what the benefits it can bring for the environment. So, and that's just what I wanted to say there. If there are questions, you can give us a call and we can go maybe talk to you about it.
Thanks, Chief. And yeah, and ideally the logs would be separated from other vegetation and not covered with all kinds of other dead litter on the forest floor. It's about separating vegetation so there's no connectivity, and it's not going to contribute to ladder fuels that will rise up to the tree crowns. This kind of diagram cartoon was taken from one of the resources that's in my reference list, a real good one called woodland fish and wildlife. Again, it'll be referenced at the end, woodlandfishandwildlife.com. It shows like a before and after, and the before is not shown here, but it has a lot. It's basically, you know, if you allow, like we've done in California, we've allowed our forests for 100 years to grow, and we've put out most of the wildfires. That just leads to almost too much vegetation on the forest floor where every inch of ground is covered. This diagram that's shown here is a better situation where we've got openings, space between large trees, small patches, dense pockets of conifers and shrubs that can be used as hiding place and habitat for birds and mammals. Openings are good for larger animals to get through, like deer, and they can forage on the new growth between larger trees. And then small interspersed wood piles, like you see at the bottom of this slide, are good, excellent for habitat for snakes, lizards, small birds, California quail. You know, as long as, you know, it's not a connected layer of brush that goes all through the forest floor. A small isolated pile is what I'm talking about here. Again, this is all beyond 100 feet from your house and your neighbor's house. Next slide, please. Just some pictures of some fire-resistant plants for Bay Area. You know, rock rose, ice plant. Ice plant's not really a native, but it kind of grows everywhere in this area, and it's, you know, drought resistant, fire resistant. And then there's an aloe plant on the right. Next slide, please. So Cal Fire's got some good advice. Like I said, they know more about this stuff than I do. You know, they're talking about your zone 1, use stone walls, patios, and intersperse a few drought resistant plants in there to create that fire resistant zone 1. Remember, there's no fireproof plants. Some are more resistant than others, but nothing is fireproof. So pick your plants with high moisture content, lean, clean, and green. Hardwood trees are less flammable than your pines and other conifers. So if you get to pick, then try to go with the hardwoods. And then always ask for advice when you go to your nursery or go to your UC Cooperative Extension Service to get advice if you can before you do your project. Next slide, please. These are just some photos basically of your zone 1 that I took from various spots online. These are not photos I took, but you can kind of see you've got like a rock-like landscape with interspersed smaller plants. Maybe you've got an old growth tree at the bottom left there that was left alone, but is, you know, has rocks surrounding it and is far from other large trees. So lots of good examples online of fire resistant landscaping ideas. Next slide, please. So these are some of the resources I used for the you know, the home defensible space, doing home defensible space in a wildlife friendly manner. And so if you want to jot these down, you can. I'm not sure if this presentation will be available, but you can feel free to contact me if you want these resources later. And I think the next slide is just the timeline for our project. And so I guess I'll hand it back to Chief now, and then can answer some questions if any come up.
Yeah, so thank you, Doug, for all of that. It's you know, I have a little background on the topic, but not as much as you, and I don't definitely, you know, work in the, ecology setting, but I do appreciate it very much, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to speak to it and to hopefully give everybody a little bit of some inspiration when they go out there and do their own defensible space work, and kind of think about all of their neighbors, when they're doing this type of work, not just their human neighbors. So we've already done, to recap, defensible space and wildfire behavior in the WUI setting. And then today we did the wildlife habitat. So we're halfway there. Our next topic is going to be evacuation. So this is going to be a very critical installation in this wildland urban interface and fire safety presentation series that we're doing. And we're going to talk about evacuating, how you can be notified, the potential for an upcoming evacuation drill. We're gonna talk about how to be prepared to evacuate, some things to consider ahead of time that would include taking care of your pets, your home, and what to make sure you bring with you. Considerations when you're evaluating which direction you're going to go. And then we're going to introduce a new program that the entire county is adopting, and the city of Hayward has been working on. It's called Zone Haven. And what it is doing is we've broken up the city into different zones. And there's zones that are specifically for evacuation. So if we've got a wildland fire that is burning and we are looking at it, our incident commanders are looking at it and saying that, you know what, we need to evacuate. This is going to give us a fast, precise way to tell our dispatcher we need to get evacuation notification to zone 83, 2, and 87, right? And so then the dispatcher can come up with a quick message, and we can get our evacuation notice to all of the homes and residents who are in those zones so that they can get that notification in a timely manner. So please do put that on your calendar to take a look at it. Captain Nicholson and Captain Paul Wheeler, our emergency management officer, are going to be teaching that class. So, and then we've got on the 14th, we're going to do a little bit more of an update on the actual project site itself. We're going to put a little video together showing the site from different angles and talking a little bit more in depth about what the site is and what the hazards are and what we're going to be doing. And then later on down the road, as the work is being done, and then when we finish the work, we're going to shoot more video and put it all together to kind of have a good timeline and historical record of the whole project. So that's where we are. And then we're looking at hopefully going to be doing the work in July, sometime shortly around the end of July and into August. And then the one thing with community participation being in August and October, one of the things that I think we really want to start looking at and stressing is that fire season now in California is pretty much year round. We can end up with wildfire threats depending on how much rain we've had. And then I also want to start encouraging our residents to start looking at, since some of these projects are, a lot of us have big lots in these areas, right? So these projects can take a long time, and you can look at them and think, just get kind of overwhelmed by them. And I want to start encouraging people to maybe look at working on these fire safety projects kind of year round and rotating around their home and around their property to kind of ensure that we don't end up with one big, major fire problem, and that we're slowly working toward getting that fire safe habitat that we want to have around each of our homes. So That's what we have for you tonight. Looks like we've got a few questions and chats going on here. I've answered 2 questions already, and let's see what we've got here. Does the city have standards for new homes and development that require defensible space that does not require new development to cut down native trees and habitat to accomplish defensible space? So we always, that's part of the whole planning process, and they do really consider the trees that are out there and the habitat that's out there, and they work around it, and they try to preserve large trees and to preserve the natural habitat as best as they can. And they also keep fire safety in mind while they're doing that. Let's see. And then as far as defensible space, initially, yes, they're going to take all those into consideration as far as when they're doing their landscaping for the new developments and that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that they end up doing with new homes is they have to build using code requirements in the new housing. So if you're east of Mission Boulevard, where the new whole housing tract is moving in, we're using non-flammable roofing materials, and siding is what we're calling for, and sprinkler systems in the wildland urban interface homes and that kind of stuff for new construction. So that's what I have for that one there. And then is there another question? No, I think that's it. 2 unanswered. Okay, we're on Upper Highland. Our neighbor has a large old dead pine and huge eucalyptus on our property line. It's extremely expensive to ever move. Is the city able to? So yeah, we do have a resident assistance program, and you can apply, residents can apply for that. It's grant money that is associated with our chipping program. And some of the money we put aside for the RAP, and there's an application process that if you qualify, we will come out there with a contractor, take a look at the proposed work that you're looking at asking for help with, and then we will take a look at it and get a quote from the contractor, and then work towards hopefully helping take care of some, if not all of that problem for you. I'll give you the email right now for that. It's firesafe@hayward-ca.gov. And that's the email address that you can go to find the application for our resident assistance program. And it'll also have information on the chipping program, which is really good. And I really recommend you to take advantage of that program. And then Doug, we did have a question earlier with a suggestion for making sure that we monitor for western red bats, and found that that is a California species of special concern and is a tree roosting bat. And they have found it in the San Lorenzo Creek area. So, and that came from Bruce, who I have worked with a little bit in the past. All right.
Okay, noted, thanks.
Yep. Let's see there. And then chat, do we have anything in the chat? Yep, there we go. And so for those of you who didn't have the, Norma, can we put the link for the website for the Fire Safe HFD in the chat? That would be, I think, helpful.
Okay.
All right, and then do we have one more? No, I think that looks like, hopefully I've gotten to everybody's questions. Unless we have anything else, I want to thank everybody for for participating in this. I have been pretty excited about having the opportunity to talk about this. I really hope it inspires, us to go out and talk with our neighbors and work on our own projects. And when we're doing this, as the fire department, we don't want to go out and have everybody do a scorched earth approach to, pun intended there, but to doing this is, we don't want to just come through and just deforest everybody's property. We want it to be beautiful for you. We want it to be scenic, and we want it to draw in the wildlife and help our environment. So I hope this gave you some good information and some things to look out for when you start doing your work around your projects. And if you have questions, you can always hit us up on our website. And time permitting, I've gone out a number of times, and a lot of our fire inspectors have gone out, and we can do site visits and help you out with some of that too, to get a plan going. So unless we have any other questions, or if Doug, if you have any final thoughts before we go, we can close the meeting for the evening.
No final thoughts. I just thank you, Chief. Thanks, Norma. Thanks everyone who joined. And if questions come up later, feel free to send them my way. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. So just want to point everybody's direction to the chat, attention to the chat real quick. Norma's putting some good information about the chipping program, when it's going to be starting, and how you can become involved in it. And I think it's one of the better things that we've been doing for a really long time, to help work in partnership with all of our residents. And I appreciate all the hard work that Norma puts into running that program. Thank you, Norma.
You're welcome.
All right. I see that it says there's one more question. What's the open question? I think that's just because I answered it on the air. I believe I've answered everybody's question that has come up. If I haven't, please feel free to email us at the website that is posted. And until then, I hope everybody stays safe. Have a great evening, and then hopefully we'll see you on May, I believe it was 10th, when we talk about escape routes and we introduce the Zone Haven program. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.